Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Cohen, the author of An Introduction to the Art and Science of Chinese Tea Ceremony. Today, we're discussing Book 2, Chapter 3, Section 4, Qing Dynasty Yixing History. Here to talk about this chapter is our editorial team, Patrick Penny.
Hey.
And Zongzun Li.
Hello.
Hello, Pat. Hello, Zongzun. In this chapter, I identify three forces which shaped Yixing wares throughout the Qing Dynasty: the attempt to create an imperial style, the development of private industry, and the introduction of European aesthetics. My first question, Pat, in what way did the Qing attempt to create an imperial style, and what was its effect on Yixing?
The Qing were a non-Han Chinese imperial force. They wanted to shape the dynasty not only with their rule, obviously through military might, but they wanted to have a legitimate claim to the throne, which involved shaping the arts of the times and I think slow infiltration of the arts and cultures of the society at that time. And so one of the ways that they go about attempting to shape the material style of the Qing dynasty is by bringing private artisans into the fold and allowing them to produce wares, specifically designed for the imperial family and the imperial palace. So they go about, not only just commissioning wares, of course, from the imperial workshops, but by utilizing these private artisans and by having them come in on rotations, they're able to advance the technologies of their wares at the time and really try and shape a very specific style, which lays a claim of legitimacy to their reign.
You're discussing the imperial workshops within the imperial palace, within the Forbidden City during the mid-Qing, started by Kangxi.
Correct. And then on top of that, the private artisans who are then also from outside workshops allowed to produce wares and are commissioned to produce wares for the imperial family.
Were Yixings ever commissioned?
I'd have to assume so. I don't think you write as much specifically, but I would have to assume so.
Zongzun, how did the development of private industry shape the development of Zisha wares?
For that, you really need to talk about the Canton system and how China started to turning from a totally enclosed system into a more open up system, during the Qing Dynasty when they start to open up ports and trade with the Western world. And it was when you start to have the scholar merchants and start to bring in aesthetics from, civil scholars, from civil appreciation, and also from Western influences.
And that gave rise to a new merchant class that did what?
Well, they had money. They could appreciate goods. They wanted to collect, right? And so not only were they demanding wares that, met their aesthetic needs, but they were also, as you start to address later in the chapter, you have those who even start to commission, right, and work with artisans, which over the course of time shapes the flow of history and the aesthetic of the wares of the Qing Dynasty, including Yixing.
Where were the merchant classes based? Was this something in northern China, southern China? Was this spread throughout China?
It's mostly southern China. It's also more merchandise than the northern China, where it's mostly influenced by the Mandarins.
What do we see in the difference in tea wares and the types of tea that was consumed between the Mandarins in the north and the merchants in the south?
The difference starting from the type of tea they consume. Mandarins in the north, they are oftentimes more interested in scented tea with strong fragrance, and also consuming larger quantity and larger format of wares. Whereas scholars and merchants in the south, they will appreciate wares with smaller size, heavily influenced by a lot of the appreciation from the Chaozhou Gongfu. And it's also where you see Yixing are much heavily used compared to Mandarins and scholars from the north.
Jason, it sounds like a overgeneralization, right? To say Mandarins in the north, large teapots, merchants in the south, small teapots. One's doing green tea, one's doing oolongs. But were there any other kind of cultural items that would be so clearly delineated between the North and the South? Obviously, being a very far distance apart, things like food, right, would have been different. Are there any other, major parts of life that would be so distinctly different between the North and the South?
There was certainly a rotation. You had the mandarins and the literatis who worked for the government that would frequently rotate every 3 years into new provincial posts, bringing them with them some retainers, some art forms, and some preferences that spread throughout China. On the other hand, many of the individuals did retire to the south. Ever since the Anlushan rebellion, the south was the more populous and the wealthier region in China. And with the advent of the Canton system, you had the rise of a heavier merchant class that had more spending power in southern China. So the level of artistic development outside of the imperial palace and the emperor and the court, which was really the only spending power, the only true spending power in the north, the majority of the development in artwork, in men of letters and the literati society happened in southern China. And so you really see more refinement, more development within the emerging market economy in denser cities throughout southern China. With, like I said, many exceptions to the rule, right? People brought things back and forth. China was well connected. Travel was relatively safe, if not fast. And so you certainly had Yixing teapots from southern China moving north. And you can see it in the imperial collections. You can see it in many of the collections of individuals who had rotated through or had friends that had rotated through Yixing. And so the spread of that was not limited exclusively to the south. But we do see different usage patterns and different styles.
And also you will see more diversification of aesthetics in the south versus in the north is more of like a unified aesthetic that's promoted by the imperial court. So in the south, you will oftentimes see different, styles and trends coexist at the same time. Like original scholarly appreciated version of Yixing, and then you have like the gilded plate Yixings, and you have the glazed karak Yixings, all sorts of styles that were used for different purposes and was driven by different cohorts of people.
I mean, the Falong Sai painted enamel overglaze Yixings coexisted with the plain Yixings and the inscribed Yixings, but the Falong Sai Yixings were predominantly a remnant of I'd say northern orders. Falong Sai was predominantly an imperial style that was promoted by the palace for the introduction of European aesthetic influences, and they attempted to apply it to everything, including Yixings.
Yeah.
And I think just one last thought I had kind of on this north and south divide as we talk about merchants and the imperial family a little bit more. Zongzun in his previous answer had just said that the merchant class in the south that would be potentially drinking more oolong was also more heavily using Yixing and smaller wares. You, I think, make a really good point in this chapter that like Yixing didn't necessarily have to become the one and only kind of clay that we really discuss to the modern day, right? So we see you have great examples in this chapter of Jingzhen teapots. What else would kind of the imperial family or northern tea practitioners or really northern royalty be using if they were going to be brewing tea other than larger vessels? What were those vessels?
You took the question right out of my mouth.
Well, I hope it made sense then.
Yeah. So there were a number of other ceramic centers that were all competing with Yixing. You had other stonewares, such as Shiwan. You had the later rise of Santo teaware. And then in the north, you had Jingzhen and Dehua. And Dehua was a real competitor. Dehua, the Blanc de Qin, was heavily supported by European export. Jingzhen obviously was the imperial kilns, and they made teaware. Right? If you look at many of the ceramic teapots, if you look at many of the porcelain teapots that were in contemporary use alongside of Yixing, it was not inevitable that Yixing would be victorious. And there are a number of forces. that coalesced in order to make Yixing what is now seen as the preeminent matching, the preeminent pairing for tea. I don't know how many Yixings you have at home, but this book has unfortunately caused me to form a expanding Yixing collection. So, maybe I have 30 something Yixing teapots, right? I have two ceramic teapots, two porcelain teapots, which I relatively rarely use.
Better than a watch collection.
Different. Pope Raird's Rolex, that's all that's required.
Better than a Hello Kitty teapot collection.
Not necessarily. Depends on your preferences.
Well, this book has also started to increase my Yixing collection for sure, as we've been doing some commissioning, which you've mentioned in a previous podcast. But yeah, I own about two ceramic teapots that I use with semi-decent frequency, but the Yixings definitely come out more.
Well, one of those at least is Japanese, right? Because you spent a bunch of time in Japan.
Actually, I didn't include that. So yes, 3. One is Japanese. I don't actually use that much. It's more for very casual tea. For actually seriously brewing, I do have just some porcelain, one a Jingdezhen porcelain pot, and then another a Korean wood-fired side handle pot.
Yeah, I think ours are different, but I also have a Korean wood-fired side handle pot. Made by Master Lin, so it's an all white, and then I have a antique Jingdezhen pot that I really only use for brewing high-end red teas.
That's not the shipwreck ware?
It is the shipwreck ware.
Oh, okay. Just casually bring that up whenever we can. People love your shipwreck stuff.
The shipwreck teapot club lives on,
getting bigger and bigger, day by day.
So we started to touch on this, but what were the effects of European aesthetics that we still see in Yixing?
When I think about the modern day, Gong Fu practitioner, and I look around at, let's just say, my Yixing collection, or what you can find pretty readily available from any Western vendor site, I would say that the effects are non-evident at the very least. Usually a lot of Western tea practitioners are buying quite simple shapes. They're buying things like shi piao or ballet or shui ping. So a lot of people at the moment are focused on things like F1, which I would say really has no relation to the European influence that we did see in the Qing Dynasty. But separating, I think, ourselves from the kind of the modern day practitioner base that we're a part of, in the Qing, you certainly see a large influence from, trade with either the Dutch East India Company or the British East India Company on Yixing development. And so, even the Dutch go as far as to craft wares in the image of Yixing, right? Low-fired stoneware from, I believe, Delft. You see a lot of, as you had mentioned just a little bit earlier, overglaze enamel and other painting decoration upon Yixing. I would say that the decoration on Yixing becomes kind of gaudier and gaudier as we go through the Qing Dynasty. And while you'll have some wares that are really elaborately crafted, it might be inlaid with gold and have beautiful paintings upon them. I think at that same time, we still have the very simple and rustic wares that the literati are a little more interested in, or potentially inscribed or something like that, which seems to be, to me, what's kind of survived to this day, because I don't see too many people going out and buying gold trimmed Yixings, at least among my friends. But certainly the influence of the Europeans was strong in the Qing Dynasty.
The aesthetic was essentially, got abandoned by the mainstream of scholars to the late Qing Dynasty. And one example, you have the famous complaint from Ran Kuisheng in his book, I guess, Talk About Tea, talking about how gaudy and unpleasant these over-decorated Yixing or zishas are. And the simpler aesthetic of Yixing should be, the pursuit of scholars.
So when are we reviving the gold-trimmed Yixing trend? When are we bringing that back, Jason?
We're going to do gold fixings on the rim and on the flange and on the spout. And we're going to get it inscribed, and then we're going to have the molted gold poured into the inscription and smoothed over. So it's actually inlaid with gold.
Welcome to Pimp My Teapot.
We're gonna need to find a good collaborator for this. This is gonna be difficult.
Who's the artist that glazed all the toilets and urinals?
Yeah, who did the gold toilet for with the museum by you Jason?
Was it? I believe it was the Guggenheim.
Yeah, who did the
it's
Guggenheim's gold toilet?
It's called America.
The piece is called America.
It's called America.
Pretty great title. Is it America or is it America?
America.
Spelled America, but pronounced America.
Gotcha. All right. So we will get that artist, I think, on our next commission. They're not going to make the teapot, right? We'll select teapots. This is a multi-artisan collab, like we see, in the late Qing Dynasty. So we'll get, our Yixing potter involved. We'll get this artist involved, and we'll start, pimping out our Yixings.
Yep.
It was by the Italian artist Maurizio Calatam.
Look at this. How international is our collab going to be?
Wow.
Some Qing Dynasty shit.
Well, that brings us to our next question. Why do we call Kangxi, Yongjin, and Qianlong the scholar emperors?
First round of imperial run of Qing Dynasty in China, and they really set the tone of how Qing is the legitimate governance of China, even though they are the Manchu people were not part of the middle in the beginning. So how they take the approach in claiming the legitimacy of their governance is by really adopting Han culture into the imperial court. So by essentially giving themselves Chinese titles, adopting the Chinese imperial system into their governance, and all of their contributions in calligraphies, poetries, study of ancient script. Essentially, they were trying to set up their legitimacy by really fully embrace the scholarship of Chinese culture.
I would say those three emperors as well, particularly exhibit, evidentiary scholarship, which is large during this time. And so you can see kind of from not only extant texts, but some of the works that were commissioned during that time as well. Scholars, and particularly in paintings, I think, Jason, we've shared in some previous chapters, paintings that depict them as scholars, paintings that depict them, tucked away in their study, with all the accoutrement of a literati at that time, and their writing as well as the wares commissioned by them kind of also go to say as much. And I think if we, very carefully study the wares at the time that were appreciated by the emperors, we can see, emperors who were, just as we attempt to do today, trying to learn from wares, trying to build their practice, maybe at a much higher level than us. Let's say their capital was pretty great, but they not only are they doing the actions of a scholar, they are having themselves depicted as such as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. A lot of the recent study even suggests that some of their works are actually created by scholars in the imperial court, but was coined under the emperor's name. So it's essentially they're positioned themselves to be the China expert, even though they are Manchu emperors.
Sounds like they're good managers.
Taking credit, putting your name at the top of the paper. What was their involvement with the literati tea culture?
Well, as we can see depicted in a lot of imagery, you will often see, if not one of the three emperors with a teapot near them or preparing tea, you'll see in a corner just a little bit of the ways off, you'll see a servant preparing tea for them. So it seems that they're always bringing tea into the fold. It's always involved kind of in their not only daily life, but potentially court rituals. We also do see, physical material evidence of tea wares that were crafted and commissioned, for them or by them, either through the imperial kilns or by private kilns. And visiting museums today, we can still see many of those wares. So I would assume, I like to assume, and obviously the paintings of them try to depict as much, that they were using these, right? And that they were enjoying tea out of them. Zongzun, anything else come to mind for you?
Nothing in particular, but I actually have a question for both of you, which I do not have a answer for. Consumption of tea in Song Dynasty, Tang Dynasty, and also Ming Dynasty, you see very active involvement of the imperial court in, defining what kind of tea they should be consumed. Like you have long time feng being back in Tang, you have powder green tea in Song, and you have the Hongwu Emperor abandoned powder green tea, moving all the way to loose leaf tea in Ming Dynasty. Has such changes been conducted or happened during the Qing Dynasty?
We know from a lot of writing that the Manchus bring their milk tea culture, right? So I don't think they try to tie it in with the Han Chinese practice of tea. I do think that they try and keep it separate, but you do hear of after banquets where wine and tea were enjoyed, the Manchu emperor still needs to enjoy his milk tea. And we have pictures as such. We have descriptions of jade cups, which were used for as much. So I think that ties in really nicely, Zongzun, because milk tea and scented teas are still rather important to this imperial line.
Yeah, it's interesting because we know that the Manchus brought their tea culture with them into the imperial court, and that they didn't actually abandon that tea culture, but they saw it very differently. They saw that as a comfort food or something that they had, in the privacy of their personal locations, right, without the entertainment to guests or others. It wasn't something that was shared or composed poetry to. Whereas on the other hand, you have inscriptions on teapots by Qianlong talking about tea on tea bowls. You have imperial wares that were heavily used for the brewing of tea. We know that Qianlong went and drank Longjing in Westlake in Hangzhou.
Right.
And so, and we know that there was tea given as tribute from southern China, so that they got to try, the new teas of the empire. What is probably more interesting than that is the direction of influence, in that for all that the Qing attempted to create a material dynasty with a material culture, with an imperial aesthetic that helped to reinforce their relationship and their involvement with the literati, what we really see is that it was commerce, and it was the new market economy, and it was competition for domestic consumption and export that really drove innovations in tea during the Qing. And so the development of better controls on fermentation, of oxidation, the development of better controls in roasting, the development of unique styles of processing, all
Right.
came out from a commercial perspective, some of which was then appreciated by the literati, some of which was then appreciated by the emperor, right? Including things like the teas from Hui, and some of which continued to go on through further development and further refinement, while others were outcompeted and were no longer produced.
And also some of them were appreciated by foreigners when they were getting export. It was really the era you start to see the gradient of oolong being developed from lighter roast to darker roast.
Yeah, I mean, we even have the record of the names, right, from that time that the Westerners started to trade these teas under. So our Suchongs and our Kimuns, Formosa oolongs of a slightly later period, all stemming from all of the trade between the British and the Dutch East India companies.
Yeah, and Lapsang Xiuzong.
Why was Yixing considered to be an art of the literati? None of the other ceramic centers, none of the other forms of teapots was considered specifically a literati art. Tea itself was, but not the wares. What was different about Yixing?
As we look, I'd say at the mid or later Qing, you see that the tea consumption in the north, right, is in the larger vessels we discussed, right? In the south, I think you have the literati who really are no longer interested in the wares that are being commissioned in the north and are really pushing forward production of not just Yixing, but ceramic wares that really fit their aesthetic. So a much more simple and refined aesthetic. And so you start to have, specific artisans who are collaborating with literati and, literati who are commissioning these collaborations. And we start to see like Chen Mengsheng's work, right, where inscriptions on teapots and even Yixing teapots that are made like the Shitiao to be good for inscribing works upon. So we see, the subtler arts being appreciated by these literati. And I think there is no really, while it can be a very gaudy art form, in and of itself, Yixings and many of the Yixings we use today are really, it's earth. There can be almost nothing more subtle. And to just craft inscriptions on it, almost like white paper and black ink, right? I think it gives you that depth and simplicity that literati were looking for, in their teaware. And it's no wonder that it became the medium for so much appreciation around tea, being Yixing teapots.
And it was also the first time you start to see artisans' name start to appear and become well known among with the commissioners and literatis, right? You have like famous Yixing makers like Bing and Mengchen, and also, commissioners who also designed the teapots like Mansheng. It was really the first time you start to see, artists who makes the wares start to get well known among the community. Back then, you won't hear any, famous makers for, like porcelains or other teawares out there, but it was really started from, Yixing teapot.
What was the role of literatis and commissions and their interaction with ceramic artists in converting this from purely a ceramic art into a literati art?
Well, you have a lot of the literati who, commission to inscribe poetries or sometimes even paintings onto the teapot. And you have like custom chops and also even customized shape designed by the literatis that later on get to collaborate with famous teapot makers and make them into sometimes a official shape later on.
And like many other wares, I think that were desirable by the literati, this becomes there's a custom of gifting it that starts to be attached to Yixing as well. So, not only would you be gifting maybe scrolls or other desirable items for the literati, but Yixing starts to join the fray as well.
How did calligraphy and inscriptions on Yixing teapots help popularize the wares? Was there additional interest that was driven to Yixing because of the works of well-known scholars collaborating on these wares?
Definitely. I mean, one idea that was start to gain popularity during Qing Dynasty is the study of reference, 考据学. Like people start to care about, the authenticity of the ware, how does the ware related to a exact scholar or a artist, and the reference behind, the chop or the signature on the wares, and that start to develop into a scholarship, and later on start to shape what we call the connoisseurship of Yixing teapot.
And which will lead, I think, as well to the real and fake copies that we will probably be discussing in later chapters.
Certainly. All right, everyone, that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this edition of TeaTechnique Editorial Conversations. Please join us again for our next conversation, Republic of China Yixing History.